So, good morning, Wilfred. Good evening.
Good morning, Ben. Good
How are
morning.
you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Very well.
Yeah, no, it's midnight here in Singapore. The last meeting call we had, I just literally run in out of a complete monsoon. They don't really have monsoon season here, but I was absolutely drenched as a rat, and poor Mike and the crew had to look at me just trying to recover myself with some coffee. But anyway, welcome, folks. This is a half hour, possibly longer fireside chat with the mighty Wilfred about smart cities and data decentralization with regard to smart cities and everything that may well propagate and catalyze its use across smart cities. So, Wilfred, why don't you start just by giving us your background? Because actually, we share a background as naval architects here, which is very rare. You come across another naval architect in life.
Yeah, it's a strange number of naval architects around this project. Let's see, I was born in South Africa. I grew up in London, Liverpool, Yorkshire, and Glasgow, I guess, was my sort of pathway there. I studied naval architecture in Glasgow at Strathclyde University, and then I taught at Glasgow University for a little while. And I actually practiced naval architecture, mainly big things, not yachts, but submarines and naval ships and other things for a while. And then I got into the offshore industry and went back and did postgraduate work in computational fluid dynamics, and that opened the doorway to Intel. And I worked at Intel. Actually, I worked for a small supercomputer company in the UK first, and then went to work for Intel and had a 26-year career in high performance computing at Intel, which was just a great career and a fun company to work for. And towards the end of that, because I'd done a lot of work, a lot of the customers for high performance computing were in federal government or university. I got asked by my boss then, the chief technology officer at Intel, to go figure out why it was that we had a big lab in smart city work in Beijing and a big lab in smart city work in Dublin, and nothing in the United States at all. And that sort of kicked off an activity that paralleled the IoT world and a whole bunch of other things, and we got into the industrial internet and a whole bunch of other things. But at the core of it was some work that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, part of the Department of Commerce here, was doing to try and figure out how to standardize data around cities. And they created a program called the Global City Teams Challenge, which looks at all the different aspects of smart cities and how cities can collaborate to create a smart city that is open and collaborative and all the kinds of things that an open city should be. And so we're still part of that. I head up, I co-chair an activity around transportation with NIST and their Global City Teams Challenge. And we're part of a leadership team that sort of sets the direction of where that program goes. That's going through something of putting it nicely, renaissance, putting it a little more harshly, a reorganization. But it's at the right time to do that. But it means we have, that group has cataloged somewhere close to 200 projects around the world that are, examples of smart city deployments in transportation and utilities and other things. And has built a framework called the IES City Framework, a framework for how software should be, what components should be in a smart city software platform. And there are a number of platforms out there, real software platforms that could be argued to align with that. Mainly it was the other way around, that all those platforms were reviewed and then boiled down into, these are the common elements that you have to have in a smart city software stack. And through all of that, we got very involved in understanding data and who owns data and how to use data, both to provide better services for citizens and to give citizens agency in their participation with the city. How do they, how does citizens really interact in a way that is constructive for the municipalities they live in? And that's become something of a passion, and that led me to Data Swift and the stuff that you guys are doing, which I find fascinating and exciting, and how we really should think about data in the places where we live.
Yeah, yeah, I love that background. I've not actually heard the full history there before, so as much as you can tell or share. I don't know how many years it's been since Intel, but out of interest, what historically did they look at cities outside of the US? Was that by decision, by chance? So Beijing, Dublin, etc. And what was their thesis, I guess? Because so my definition, having had an inside view of like Sidewalk Labs and some of the alphabet efforts in the US of recent years, it's more hard asset focused as opposed to data focused, soft focus, etc. So yeah, I'm just very curious as to what the details were there.
What was going on? We were getting, a lot of the labs work at Intel is often created within the labs. You hire the best people you can, and you let them work on what they want to work on. And then you try to marshal that into something useful that moves the product forward. And Intel on their software side was had a very broad focus, because at the end of the day, we sold microprocessors. So anything that used a microprocessor was fair game. I think the challenges that smart cities have were more visible early on in Europe and Asia. Now, that doesn't mean that the bigger problems were there. The bigger problems are actually here, I think, but for good historical reasons, right? So European cities are far denser than US cities. US cities mostly came into being during the automotive age, and they're quite well spread out. The town that I grew up in, it was common that you'd walk to everything you needed. It wasn't hard, right? And when I came home from school as a young kid, I walked past all the stores I would need to buy things for that evening. It was a small town. Even the larger towns like London, you live in an area, all the shops are right there, right? You live in LA, you don't go to the shop without getting in the car. I mean, it doesn't happen, right? I mean, it's pretty hard. So the motivations were different, and I think the density of cities in Europe and Asia just created a different environment. And we didn't necessarily think of that at the time. The problem that I was asked to solve was, look, smart cities are happening and they create well-paying, important jobs, and the United States is not playing. Why are we not playing? Now, this was 8 years ago, or thereabouts. We are playing in a big way now. I mean, the United States, particularly with the money that's being released through the infrastructure bills that are now in play, and the infrastructure bills we hope will still be in play at some point. There is a recognition that we should, and it's not universal. I mean, no country has one view, and more than anything else, America has multiple views on all these things. But there is a fairly significant community of people here that recognize that this kind of expenditure doesn't happen all the time, and we better make sure that when we invest in infrastructure, we're investing in the infrastructure for the 21st century, not the 20th century. And there is some serious worry amongst people that I circulate with that the majority of the money will go into concrete and asphalt, and that's not the right place for it. That there is infrastructure we need as a country to be competitive, that is smart, that is intelligent, and we should be thinking about that as we get involved. I think there was a report that Cisco did many years ago looking at infrastructure spend. It's probably out of date now, but I still use it as a bit of a rule of thumb that that for every $10 you spend on infrastructure, you should be spending about $1 on technology, right? That the infrastructure will be more reliable, more maintainable, if it is instrumented early on. And there are lots of examples of that. Putting sensors in water systems so as you can find out where they broke. Putting sensors on energy systems so as they can be more dynamic. These things should just be being done as a matter of course. They do add a little capital to the front end, but the saving in operational costs long term are huge. And we can't be competitive if we're still working with old infrastructure that is not well maintained and costs too much to maintain. So it's very important we get this right. I think it's very important globally we get this right. And then on top of that, if you start to add issues of sustainability and dealing with things like carbon use, we need to document it. We need to track it and manage it. And we can't fix the carbon problem unless we understand where it's being used and how we can do better. So the smart side of smart cities is, while still fairly nascent, is of critical importance, and particularly if we're investing in infrastructure for the next, the next 30, 40 years, we better get some technology in there that allows us to manage the future of climate change and other things. So it's important to get this right.
Yeah, I'm just going to say a big amen to all of that. having helped found and fund, it was actually a blockchain-based platform, but it's specifically targeted. They're actually launching fairly soon, so targeting basically debt and asset financing for infrastructure, starting in the US but going global. I'm completely on board with all of that. I think part of it is catch up, right? So there's the economic side of things and getting refi in place, and you're right, they're 30-40 year assets, guys, so we can't mess around and not put the tech in now. So yeah, like I said, a big amen. So I won't go down that rabbit hole, because we could talk about the economic side of it and the needs there. $15 trillion funding gap over the next 10 years or whatever it is, just for the US. So yeah, and the other one that actually, just picking up on what you were saying earlier in that piece, is we'll stay focused on the US actually, just to keep scope. But yeah, looking at the history you were talking about with regard to Beijing and Dublin, it's fascinating. Maybe we can bring it back later in the chat, but population densities and the way in which infrastructure and cities are constructed globally do shift the way in which you use technology in cities. So that's a question I'll throw in at the end. And being here in Asia at the moment, I mean, Nusantara is all over the news because Jakarta's sinking into the sea and all that sort of stuff. So, and then you've got Neom being created out in the middle of the desert, just purely for tech reasons and trying to become sort of the new Babylon of technology. But so segueing back into the flow of the chat, I mean, tell me a little bit more, or the audience a little bit more, about urban systems, because obviously this is a long story that's led you to something, and what you guys are doing is pretty fascinating, and obviously how we're looking to partner with you and what we're doing with you. So.
Yeah, and it is a long story, and I'll try and do the pre-seed version, the digestible version. There are really two organizations here. So we started two organizations. One is a nonprofit, a 501c6 membership organization called Open Commons, and with the recognition that that you need to that cities all over the world are basically doing a lot of the same things, but they're doing them differently, unnecessarily differently. People would say sort of unnecessary differentiation, right? That permitting or 311 systems, there is a lot of commonality all over the world in how those systems are put together. But mostly the cities, go out and buy a black box product, or build on top of an existing framework, a proprietary solution that does for them what they need to do, and that this is not ideal in any sense. This is not ideal. It's not ideal for the people who deliver the software, because in many cases, being a black box, it gets misused, and then they get trouble. I'm currently the mayor's representative on the Technology Oversight Committee in the city of Portland, and we get to look at all of the projects that come through and try to advise on those. And I've, because of that, I've looked at many other cities, and they all have the same challenge, which is they're trying to build quite complex technical solutions within city infrastructure, and they're in many cases trying to custom build them. And they don't have the technical teams, because cities can't afford to hire the best technical people against people like Google. They get some really good people, many of them willing to take lower salaries to do the right thing for the cities. But it's difficult. It's difficult to get those folks in-house. And so what they tend to do is they tend to go for these black box purchases. They, oh, we got to have a 311 system. Let's pick up the phone and we'll put out a solicitation and we'll get the Oracles and the IBMs to come in and they'll custom build us a 311 system. But basically it's the same system that, 20,000 other cities across the world are doing. And it would be so much better if this had shifted to an open source community, and that the APIs for the data were common, and that you basically pull up the same components and then you customize them for your city. And so our recognition was open source, open data are critical to well-functioning community-driven smart cities. That has to be the baseline. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't purchase purely commercial software at times, but the baseline ought to be that if you're just doing a 311 system, there ought to be one out there. You hire somebody that takes that 311 system and implements it for you in Portland and implements it for you in Beaverton and Austin and all these other cities. And that when I, as a citizen, move between those cities, I got a pretty good idea what I'm facing, that those same services are there and they work in more or less the same way. They may be customized, that the policies of how a building is built in Portland may be different from the policies in Austin, but the mechanisms ought to be fairly common. And we all as citizens ought to be able to be aware of that and know how they're working and how they're working for us. So we created Open Commons as a way to get a community of companies and partners together to create that open source base, to sort of create, I hate the analogy, but it's an easy one to use, which is sort of create the open source operating system for the city, the Linux of the city. It's much different from an operating system, which is why I struggle with that. But it is a common code base that you can tap into. And of course, you can put proprietary software on a Linux server and so on. So this is not I'm doing this because it's purely just the right thing to do. It's actually the right thing to do for all the economic reasons, for all social reasons. It makes sense. But in order to deploy something like a Linux for cities, you need something like a Red Hat for commercial front end. So we set up urban systems because we recognized that none of the cities could deploy a production open source package themselves. They would have to hire a company that was able to come in and provide them, service support, 24/7 dial-up, guaranteed operating parameters, and that needed to be a commercial entity, and that would be a very valuable commercial entity. We're not entirely doing this to just provide free function. We recognize that there won't be just one urban systems, there will be many across the world, but that any one of them is a very valuable company. It understands how to take that open source package and implement it for a city and keep it running and provide support to that city and to customize those packages. So those two work together for us, that Open Commons is out there. We, Urban Systems, are a member of Open Commons. There are already quite a few companies that collaborate with Open Commons. They will be the basis that sets the directions for, APIs and data standards and other things. It's not like they necessarily have to invent them. In many cases, they already exist. We have to select them, and then cities have to agree to use the same ones, right? There's the problem, standards are only good standards if there's one of them. You have to agree to it. If there are many standards, then there's no standard. So the idea really of Open Commons is to have an agreement amongst cities that join Open Commons and companies that join Open Commons that they set a direction that is consistent. So as you get interoperability between cities, so as you get data portability between municipalities and those kinds of things. So that was why we set up Urban Systems. We found ourselves doing a lot of sort of front-end work through Urban Systems, sort of consulting work to advise cities. We used to do it for free because we thought, oh, this is pre-sale support. But when you're in a new space like smart cities, there's a lot of pre-sales and not a lot of sales. So at some point or another, you say, okay, we'll do this, but in if we're asked to do a lot of it, it has to be paid because it might be a while before cities get to the point where they're actually deploying and purchasing, and it can be a little expensive on the front end. So that sort of sets up those two companies. Hopefully that answers the urban systems question, what we do.
Yeah, digging into open commons as well. To my shame, I didn't actually know what open commons was until you introduced us to us, which is appalling for someone that's had somewhat of a background in smart cities. So open is the largest platform in the world, is it, for open projects regarding cities?
I would like to think so. I don't know them all. I don't know them all. Yeah. We have a very good community. So we created that very much in collaboration with the National Institute of Standards Global City Teams Challenge team. And so all of those projects, and there were 167 at the end of last year that were authorized to be called GCTC projects. So, somebody comes along and they say, hey, I'm doing this cool project, and GCTC, the NIST, provides them with a template and says, please fill in this data. And then they review that and they say, okay, is this a real project? I mean, are there really people behind? Is there a municipality? Is it getting deployed? Even if it's not already deployed, is it getting deployed? And they then sort of put their stamp on it, and it's called we have now started to go beyond that. We have quite a few projects in there that are best examples that we can find of particular projects, even if the municipality didn't engage themselves. And in many cases, some of the really exciting projects were actually backed by developers. They're commercially developed. We're working with a Museum of Science and Industry here in Portland that has a 27-acre site in the center of the city that they were given by the local utility, who had used it as a power station. But it's a beautiful piece of land right on the river. And they're looking at developing it, and they have all the right objectives, right? They're trying to make it sustainable. They're trying to make it community driven. And so it's a wonderful example for us, but it's OMSI, it's the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. It's not the municipality. And under the rules of the original GCTC, we wouldn't be able to put that project in there because the municipality isn't doing it. So we've gone beyond that. We keep the branding that says, this has been officially approved by the GCTC group, but we're also starting with an open commons to collect best practices projects from anywhere that we can find them. And the real objective again is that commonality, the fact that whatever you do for one project can be very helpful in figuring out what to do for the next project. And we ought to be learning from one another. And in many cases, that's been hard to do. So open commons hopefully helps remove some of the barriers. Within the GCTC alone, the mailing list is 8,000, and they're global. So I don't think I could claim that it's the biggest because I don't have enough information to prove the negative, or disprove the negative. But it's a good community, and I encourage anybody to go out there. It's totally open. You can get a membership and start to contribute to that. So if you've got projects, you can start to put them out there. The idea is that it is community built and becomes a resource to the whole community.
Yeah, no, that's a great plug. And for folks listening, what's the web address? Because there's two Open Commons websites. I fell for the first one.
Oh,
the one we're talking about is .org, is that right?
There are several. There's opencommons.com, opencommons.net, and opencommons.org, and they're all ours.
They're all yours. Okay.
They're all ours. But opencommons.org is the one that is the 501c6. We haven't deployed .com yet at all. We may at some point find that useful. And the .net is I can't remember what we're using that for. I think it's mainly back office management.
Okay.
It's where the emails come and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Back office management for the nonprofit. But the nonprofit owns those three URLs. So sorry if that's confusing. Maybe
No. It's just to make sure we land on the right one. So we'll go for .org.
It's www.opencommons.org.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I've loved exploring it. there are a decent handful of open development communities out there, but when it's something around the physical world, like you've said, it's like the OS for cities, right? So this is just fantastic. Listing the projects on there, having a good read of the companies, obviously ourselves now being on there, but just seeing everybody. You've got some big names there as well. Hey, like Intel and Nvidia's logos involved, diving into some of the projects. So it's not small. It's really good stuff.
Not small.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work. Intel has been involved. Both Intel and Nvidia mostly around their computational side. In fact, they were early supporters of what we were doing because, and this is actually interesting across all these bits and pieces. We had set up a small nonprofit called Modelado while I was still working at Intel to do collaboration around. We were developing an operating system for high performance computers, it was funded by Department of Energy and Department of Defense here, so it was quite a big project, big money in it. But none of the participants were comfortable posting a collaborative site on their website, right? So Intel doesn't want people that don't work for Intel putting stuff on a branded Intel website for all sorts of good reasons. And you want a collaborative site. You want a place where you can say, yeah, there may be some bad stuff gets put up here by bad actors, but we need to have a place where everybody working on the project can actually post stuff. We try to be very disciplined about taking bad stuff down, and we try to make sure that people on the site are legitimately on the site and we know who they are. But it needs to be collaborative. So it can't be branded Intel, can't be branded NVIDIA, can't be branded these other things. So it has to be a separate collaborative site. So that was where we started, and then it became Open Commons and this thing.
Yeah, no, it's great. They're the same with any open collaboration. It's always faster solution finding. It's open. The whole point is people are involved. Where people are involved, there's always a little bit of shifty, but it's all good. So keeping a flow to the comment. There's loads of offshoot questions I've got, especially around some of the projects that are on there because I've had a good look. But keeping the flow of it. So Citizen app, what is it? What's it going to do? Who's developing it? Who's involved? What stage is it at? What does it actually do for the user? Because I mean, we can talk about operating systems for cities all we like, but like, what is it in terms of my experience as a city goer? I'll leave it open for you to describe and go into that.
Yeah, well, let me take a couple of steps back and sort of lay some groundwork here. I think everybody will be comfortable that this, well, hopefully everybody comfortable this issue exists. So as the data economy is built up, the predominance has been that large companies create large databases that they can mine, ostensibly to deliver better services. And there are many examples of this, and they're very good, right? I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, and I love the one-click purchase, and I love the fact that they know who I am and they trust me, and that they'll send me something, and if it's wrong when I get it, I can send it back. It's no hassle. I can walk down the road here and drop it off. That relationship there is built on their knowledge of me and my knowledge of them. And we have a good relationship that way. And there are lots of those services. Some of them have got distorted, right? And we know this. We're very worried about how data has been used by, everybody from the folks who give us our credit rating to Facebook, and how they've made data available for all sorts of other targeting and mining of information. Whether we are strongly against that or strongly pro that, it's a perfectly good business model. It's worked for many things. That large corporations will collect data and provide better services. The problem is it's one leg in at least a two-legged stool, if there's such a thing. That it puts all the data in large organizations, and in many cases creates data lakes, huge opportunities for bad actors to get at large amounts of data that they can use for all sorts of things that we would wish they didn't use it for. And the other side of that, which is that we own our own data, is kind of missing, right? It's very hard to own your own data. I spent a lot of time at Intel working on a project called Dossier, which was one of many, as everybody knows, one of many medical personal data stores. It was our version of it. It was a good one. But like many other things, like pretty much all the other personal data stores, it was not successful, and we could talk for a long time about why that was the case. But But that side is missing, that ability for me to collect data of my own that I can use, that I use, in a digital sense is very immature if it exists at all. And in real life, that's how we handle most of our data. I mean, I'm sitting at my desk here. I've got several file drawers. I could pull out, birth certificate, passport, driver's license, credit cards quite quickly. You can't go to anybody else to get those, right? They're in my possession. Now, they may have been issued by my bank or the state I live in or the country I live in, but they are documents that I have. And if somebody needs them, they come to me, right? Now, in the world where we look at, city services in this context, there is no equivalent to that, right? If my driver's license is held by my state in a state database and a state data lake, when the cop pulls me over, they don't have to come to the window. They just get at my driver's license, whether I like it or not, whether it's legitimate or not, they can get at the driver's license. And I have no way to, make my case. I don't even get asked. It's just done. I lose agency in that interaction. Now, if the cop comes to my window, I'm very likely to just show him my driver's license. But what if he pulled me over illegitimately? I'm still in the conversation, right? It's still there. So as you move away from these commercial services like Amazon to something that is more, a government-driven service, this agency issue becomes very, very important. It becomes important, interestingly, both to the government agency and to the individual involved. So I work, as I say, a lot with the city of Portland, and the city of Portland is a very forward-looking city. It cares a lot about equity. It cares a lot about its citizens. And it doesn't want to collect huge databases of very private information about its citizens. I mean, it has the right behavior. They do not want that data. They don't want it for legal reasons. They understand that data can be claimed by public information releases or by FISA court requirements, and they don't want to be stuck between their citizens and all of those entities. So they're very much in the space of, we want to target services. We want to give you the best service we can give you, but we don't want to collect a whole lot of information about your financial status and your educational status and so on. But that's needed in the interaction. So you can imagine in that situation, the ideal situation is that you come with your file cabinet with all of that information in it for that transaction. And if that existed, not only could you transact very quickly and easily with the city, but you could transact with any other citizen quite quickly and easily. So how do we get to this point? How do we create this environment where we have our own personal data stores, and into those personal data stores, you can place various different forms of identity that can be verified quickly to allow those kinds of transactions to exist, that a citizen can have their own data store and that they can engage with their own agency in all sorts of transactions without having need to refer back to these huge data stores that are targets for bad actors. There are back to your original question, the citizen app is the starting point for addressing that issue, creating a common base, an open common base that we can all look at that says we can now create a community of interacting services that are low friction between individuals and their governments, between individuals and companies. It can work in that way. Now, I'm not recommending that this replace the other business models. I don't think that that's necessary. But I think that there are services that are currently sort of packed into those that are inappropriate, that will move. But actually, I think the more exciting piece to this is that the services that we want largely around cities are not happening because this doesn't exist. The city has no interest in collecting this data, so you're not getting tailored services that you would need. You're not getting low friction services. And when you start to look at those low friction services, the removing the friction is like removing the overhead cost, right? If the transaction is easy, then the service can happen. So equity starts to come into this. You can start delivering quite tailored services to people who otherwise, may not be able to engage very well in the societal infrastructure, people who may be homeless or, some low economic status at the time, many of whom desperately need city services. You can remove a lot of the friction in this, and you can do it without invading their privacy. You can give them a data store into which the city can put various different identifications that would allow them to then turn up and get food services, get health services, etc., with low friction. One other piece I'll throw into this, because I think it's been very interesting to us. There are transactions that you do with the city that are not financially based, that they are based on incentives and other actions, that they are good for society to do them. And as we move into a world of climate change, it becomes really interesting to start looking at those. I'll give you one example because we're working on it directly. We've been working on a European partner on something called Go Green. And the idea of Go Green is, how do you incentivize people to leave their cars at home and take public transit? Interestingly enough, I think it's worldwide, but it's certainly very common here in the United States, that we kind of incentivize people to drive. If you drive down to a local store, maybe you drive to the Apple store to buy a laptop, you can walk in with your parking tab and get it stamped, and you get free parking. That's incentivizing you to drive, right? I can't walk in with my TriMet ticket, with my transit ticket, and get that stamped, but I should be able to, right? I should be able to go in and say, oh yeah, if you're willing to pay my $5 parking fee, why won't you pay my $2.50 for the transit ticket? So can I create a mechanism that would put data in my wallet that the Apple store could look at quickly and say, oh yeah, you came by transit, I'll pay you transit fee. That's easy. And when you start to think down that line, there are all sorts of ways in which you could give an incentive to people who do socially positive things, right? And that whole economy depends on quick, easy transactions with a fair amount of data that you don't really want to go searching all these databases for. That could be in my wallet, and I can be the one that says, I don't want Apple to pay my parking, so I don't give them my parking ticket. Or here it is, it's a quick transaction. Okay, we're done. I'm on. So that's really the kind of thing we're going to be able to start to do with the Citizen app. Be able to create very low friction transactions of that kind that allow us to become active participants in our society, both financially and through other incentives, and how we can become, our own agent effectively, not to take our agency away and stick it in a database somewhere, but it's our data. We come into that transaction, we bring the information, we do the transaction, it has real value.
Yeah, that's awesome. So summarizing, the Citizen app is an open source app that allows any city to tailor it to itself for citizens to securely transact on their own information with any city service that they want to do.
Yeah, we're starting to see citizen action groups doing it, right? So we work here with a group called Code for PDX, which is part of Code for America. It's a chapter of Code for America, and they want to deliver services, right? They want to make things easy. So we're having a discussion. They're having a discussion with the mayor's office right now about collecting neighborhood data for social change, and the Citizen app could be a really good tool to help remove all of the issues you would need around identifying that individual and whether or not they're legitimate to be involved. So let's say you live in a particular neighborhood and you want to make statements about what's going on in that neighborhood. The city kind of like to know you actually are from that neighborhood, that you're not some outside actor that's coming in to try and make some case that's not got anything to do with that neighborhood, that neighborhood actually has people who are engaged. So them coming with their data, I make the statement, I have to drive 2 miles and park in a park and ride to get to work, and I do that every day. And it'd be really good if there was a small bus service here that took me from where I am to. That would be good for society. It would be good for sustainability. It would be good for me. But you don't want people coming in who work for the car lobby skewing the data, right? You want people in that community to be saying, this is us, we're legitimate, and we'd use it. And so having a Citizen app with your own data in that can be validated brings that person in, brings their agency and brings their participation in, and removes all the friction associated with making sure that they are who they say they are, that data is actually theirs, that it hasn't been, and that kind of ability to do those kinds of interaction, you need a citizen app.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I really enjoy this because, so having worked a couple projects around the world in different cities and areas, it's interesting because there are lots of different theses on how to migrate a city from where it is today to smart city in 5 years, 10 years. The typical innovation life cycles, 10, maybe 15 years. We're hoping that it shortens with technology to 8 years, but let's be honest, it's not. Not yet. Where people are involved, and especially where the hard assets in cities cases being roads, lampposts, bus stops, buildings, whatever you want to call it, something physical, makes that harder. But yeah, I'm slowly growing a thesis here at Data, because one of the biggest applications for what we're doing, obviously, personal data servers and creating data liquidity by decentralizing data back to individuals. One of the biggest applications is the redevelopment of relationships between people and their environments, right? And urban environments. And so listening to you speak, the biggest thing that stands out is, hopefully it backs my thesis, but my thesis is that the fastest way to get to a smart city is first collecting the data in the right way. So in this case, it's giving it to the citizens and then allowing edge computation and permissed access to figure out what's actually happening in the city and what your relationship is with the city. And then once you've built that picture, build the systems around it. Because I've seen a lot of largely big corporates, and I won't badmouth anyone specific, but like you can find teams moving into cities like, oh, we're going to experiment this and we're going to put in like heated pathways for people so they don't slip up on the ice, or smart roads that measure actual traffic. Like, that's all great, but who's going to pay for it? Right. And often it gets fed back, behind the scenes. A lot of them don't succeed, but it's going to be fed back in tax or whatever it is. I'm like, half of this stuff you just don't need. So like when you actually build that soft picture first, which is the data-led picture, and through a correct means, like you're saying, decentralizing it to individuals, you actually can solve real needs, as opposed to forking out a load of usually billions of dollars on something that's not going to go very far and probably not going to get financed in the long run. So yeah, I mean, one of my big questions for you was like, how do you view, and by the way, guys, do keep throwing your questions in the box. We've got those and I'm definitely going to ask them. My next question was going to be, how do you view, data decentralization as advantageous to cities? But I think that's pretty clear, because, I mean, you can't really get anybody to give their information without it being secured to themselves. I call it the Wild West at the moment. I love your example of having a filing cabinet. You've got to keep that conversation between you and the cop that pulled you over, right? I don't like using that example because there's a lot of political stuff going on in the environment, but right. If they can just access that without your permission, it's better they actually chat to you first, right?
It seems like a small thing, right? The guy doesn't have to get out of the car and he looks it up. But what you're doing is you're eliminating my agency. I'm no longer part of that conversation. And societally, it's critically important that I'm part of that conversation for all sorts of reasons. But if agency isn't enough, right? Your thesis is a good one. So if agency is not enough to convince you that I ought to be involved in all of those data discussions, so the data ought to originate with me, I can give you a couple of others, right? So let's start with the compute near the edge. So let's say I live in Portland, and while I live in Portland, I put all of this information into my database. That's all quite personal information about, I mean, it may be as important as I can't read, right? I don't want everybody to know that I'm illiterate, but hey, it may be as detailed as that, because that may eliminate several services that I would otherwise use in the city. And I don't want to be told, hey, go to this scooter rental place and you'll be shown a list of options that you have to select from. It may not be possible for me to do that, right? Now that's an extreme case, but I put all of that information in there. I can give you examples of where, it might be that I'm old and I can't ride a bike. There are all sorts of things that I put in there that I don't really want to publicize. I certainly don't want them in the state's database, because they may make decisions for me that I don't want them to make, that I should be making. But I might put a lot of that information in there. So, okay, I build that up, and then I go on a trip. I go fly down to Austin, right? Now, all those same services behave in the same way but my data's all in some database up in Portland, right? And maybe it's a TriMet database, maybe it's a state database. I can't get those customized services. I have to start populating it again in Austin. Now, Austin is a good distance from Portland, but actually Portland is made up of 27 municipalities, all of whom collaborate around transit solutions. Do I have to start filling in databases in all those municipalities so as I can use the scooters here and there, even though I might on a daily basis be going to 3 or 4 municipalities? They're all separately managed. Some of them have their own, they have their own last mile solutions. So I want the compute to be at the edge because I want to fill in the data in a way that whichever service I interact with is able to interact with me. They don't have to go and ask permission, right? Now, start putting that in the context of things like GDPR, right? If every transaction that I do, I am involved in, if my data is being used, I'm involved in the transaction, you actually simplify all the GDPR stuff hugely, right? You can do stuff that you otherwise can't do. If the data's in a database at the city, they should have collected it for a particular use. You can't use it for another use. So the city can't actually provide that data legitimately under GDPR. I can, right? I'm the one person who can say, yeah, that might be quite invasive to my privacy, but you know what? The return is worth it. I'm willing to do it. And there are plenty of situations where that's the case. For example, as a general rule, I wouldn't want a general database having all my information about where I live and where I work, right? And we know all of this obscuring that goes on when Google databases and others have to be obscured in order not to invade my privacy. But let's say I get a phone call from the local metro, says, we're looking at putting a new train line in. And for the purpose of that, we'd like you to share your daily trips, how often you go to this place and that place, and whether or not it would be useful. Now, I might be willing to give them truly detailed information about what train station I would get on at, which one I would get off at, how many times a week I do that. That would really help them. Now, if they go and pay, a lot of money to get, sidewalks, a database, they get an obscured database that costs them a lot of money, as you point out, that I pay because it's tax payment. So I'm paying money to have the city use my data that I would have been perfectly happy to give them for free, and it's been obscured, right? Those are the kinds of things that you can start to remove once you have agency for your own data, right? It removes a lot of the transaction cost in that, and it allows me to now become an agent in my own decisions. I can say, yeah, I don't want to give you my data. I would never ride the transit system anyhow, and you're not getting my data because I don't want to give you that. Or I can say, yeah, I'm willing to give you any data you want. Just get me a train line between where I live and where I work. So that's where agency starts to really have a huge impact. So both of those are really important, and they get lost if we don't have that option. I'm not saying that the other options that we use today, that big data lakes are inherently evil. They're not. They're good places. As a data scientist, I lived on large databases. I can tell you that we can do some really very, very good things with large databases, but we're missing out a whole section if we don't find ways to give citizens agency to their own data and have them be active participants in the services they get and how they're put together.
Yep.
And that's all compute at the edge. I liked your thesis. It's a good one.
Oh,
data, not only compute at the edge, but data at the edge.
Yeah.
The individuals have the data. And I can give you examples of why you want to push data to devices at the edge as well. And so there's a whole section of this that the Citizen app is going to open up for us. And again, Citizen app, as you point out, is open source, and several of the companies on this, particularly DataSwift, has done a huge amount of work to get it into place, and that's fantastic. It doesn't remove the commercial side of this by any means. First of all, as we pointed out earlier, the fact that it's open source, any city that deploys this is going to need commercial help. They're going to need support and maintenance. But actually, on top of that, there will be derivatives of this that should be commercial that will have very specific value to particular groups. If a company wants to make various services available to their employees, they may choose to keep the trust of their employees and provide those data services through a data wallet, so they're not collecting that data. And they may choose to do that as a proprietary app themselves, and they should be able to look at what's been done and what's the best practice in the Citizen app and use that. It's beneficial to us all. So I think that the Citizen app is a really good starting place. It starts to open up a community that recognizes the importance of data near the edge and the agency that gives to individual citizens and participants in these various transactions.
Yeah. I think to take a step back, what is edge computing and edge data? And it's funny because years gone by, I think I said it in one of the other symposium sessions, but when we did studies on launching basically things like digital identity, we found that folks were more willing to give away their passport details for a free yogurt, no, you took my data. And it goes back to the agency, problem where it's like, oh, you actually chose to do it, so it's okay. And for me, the sociological definition of edge computing is you decided to share. Yeah. It's literally that, because
you decided to share for that particular purpose, right? That's also
correct.
Critical. I mean, a lot of those horrors are when somebody says, well, I shared my data to get the ice cream, but I did not know they were going to use it to influence my vote, right? It's what you share it for. I'm perfectly happy to share a huge amount of information with Amazon, so as when I go to their website, the things that I want are right up front and I can find them easy. Or with Netflix, so as the movies I want to see pop up at the top. Those are positive things. But if Netflix then uses that data to target political information to me, that's a different game, right? That's not okay. And there are legal mechanisms to do that, but actually the best one, as you point out, is to push that data at the edge. I mean, I could do all of that Netflix stuff in one transaction. I don't have to have a Netflix account. I could go to any movie service and I could have an edge agent, right? An artificially intelligent agent on my end doing edge computing that takes the whole catalog or a big chunk of the catalog, sorts through it all, and just shows me what I want to see, right? I don't have to give all my information to them. They can just give their information to me. And it's not that one is better than the other. There are plenty of situations where one is better and not the other, and vice versa. We need both. We need the Citizen app, right? Just like we need data lakes. I'm not shooting at data lakes. I'm just saying that particular hammer doesn't knock in all the screws, right? We need a few screwdrivers.
Yeah. And speaking with a lot of the businesses we chat to, so I would estimate that probably 90 to 95% of businesses don't want all the data they've got.
Yeah.
Because it actually burns a giant hole in their operating costs. So you've got cybersecurity that you've got to pay for, IT infrastructure, and the data just sits there, doesn't do anything, doesn't make you any money, and you can't use it because there's 120 countries with data regulations that don't allow you to move it. So it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, but we need this to do our one-off exchange. And then forever after, as a business, we're paying the security risk of holding that legally, as well as technically. And
by the way, when you put data in a data store like that, it is decaying, and the decay rate is surprisingly rapid. I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but they're in the right ballpark. We, on average, in our lives, move every 5 years, and we change job every 3 years. So if you've got a database with my home address and my work address, at the end of the year, 25% of the home addresses in that database are incorrect, and 33% of the work addresses are incorrect. Right?
That's wild.
Now, if I have that data locally, when I change job or when I move, I change the information. I'm not going to go and search out every state database and correct my work address. I'm not going to go out and search every state database to change my living address. But if the state asks me when they need to send me a bill where I'm living right now, they'll get the right answer, right? So there's a huge benefit to the consistency of the database. So all the things you've just said, there's a burden to a company that that they have to keep that data up to, that they have to keep that data managed correctly, that when they've got these million credit card numbers, that there's a huge security burden that they have to take, or GDPR will come and get them. And they have to do that now. They didn't used to have to do that, and they didn't do it very well, which is why we had so many data breaches. Now they kind of have to do it. But on top of that, if 25% of the home addresses are wrong at any one time, you can't really use that database very effectively. So why not let the individual answer the question at that time? Because I'm willing to update my address in one place all the time. Like, I put it in I'll put my address in my file drawer anytime I change it, right? And if you ask me, you'll get the right one.
Yep, 100%. It's particularly poignant at the moment because I was thinking I travel for work pretty much all the time, not so much during COVID, but I keep getting my student loan letters from my naval architecture degree way back in the day. And every time I go back to the UK, it's like, hang on a second, how many penalty fees am I paying now? Because the letter's gone to my address and I'm not living there anymore. This is ridiculous. But no, yeah, so to summarize the Citizen app, so it's an open source app that we can quasi-tailor to any city, which is appropriate because, as we've discussed, the city states and the way cultures work from Asia to the Middle East to America are all different. So you need that variation, and it's good to honor that and point that out. But it also, because of the way it works, it's edge compute, and it actually gives you data on demand being the word that sort of summarizes the last 5 minutes of chatting, which is, I think, my favorite piece of it all, because, as you say, it's not only accurate information, but businesses don't need to store the data. It's like, great, got what we needed from you in that exchange, fantastic, have a nice day, and so it's cheaper for everybody, more accurate for everybody. I mean, my long-term dream is that in the Citizen app world, be it Citizen app or a plethora of others that emerge, you do have those unified experiences. So that you own all your own data. It's on your app, no one else owns it. You can share what you want on a non-identifying basis or identifying basis, and you do things like, I don't know, even creating data economic zones. So part of the thing that it took me a while to get my head around this for cities, to be honest, but as I look around and see, what is it, 98% of in the US companies are SMEs, businesses with less than 200 employees. And yet who is it that has all the capital? And so it's like, how do we redirect the whole of the economic flow to these guys? Not the whole of it, but the right amount. And things like the Citizen app actually allow local authorities to begin doing things like directing foot traffic, because you suddenly can get match made within the app using your data. Your data never leaves the app to, I want a pizza. Oh, there's one just down the road. I never knew that was down the road. Or, there's a cultural event going on in a district that's maybe slightly poorer in the city, and the reason it's poorer is because it doesn't have a lot of foot traffic, so crime is higher because there's no one walking past, right? So you can start redirecting folks there and doing cultural events where suddenly you can actually see there's no foot traffic because you're able to access folks there. So you end up with all sorts of fun things, even like homelessness. Like I always wonder, what if you have a little tab so you can flag where the homeless folks are, so someone can go feed them or offer them a blanket or something, So there's just so much opportunity. But yeah, I share that because I think not everyone, I love harping on about edge computing, because to be absolutely clear, edge computing is a state where you do not share identifying information if you don't want to. Mm-hmm. And so I love the example you gave about Netflix, because it's a case of, okay, how does the world operate today? You throw your data at Netflix, they do what they like in their big house with it. You have no idea what they're doing in that house. Uh-huh. Now, Netflix comes to you, it says, hey, can we access your data with our algorithm? The algorithm stays in your Citizen app or whatever it is, finds out from your information what you'd like, and you start playing it, but the data never leaves. It's all computed on the edge. You see it on the edge. So sorry for anyone that knows what edge computing is. It's just like, I'm sure there'll be folks tuning in that don't always see that full picture and how safe it is, basically. So
yeah, I'll give you another example, which was to us, because I'd mentioned that we work with Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and they do a lot of STEM education for a lot of reasons, right? That they're a museum, kids come in and they've become very effective at teaching various skills and knowledge to those kids. And what I mean by that is they understand that if somebody, that if they understand the level of literacy of the children as they come in, that they understand what educational background they've had, if they understand what racial background they've had, they can target the educational experience much more effectively. Now, you can imagine that the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry is not really interested in having a huge database with all of the educational level and the rest of it of a child. But in order to target the educational experience well, they need that information. It really does matter if the kid is not at a reading level. It's good for the course. Nobody's in good shape, right? It doesn't help the class. It doesn't help the child. It doesn't help anyone. With the edge computing approach, a parent could have a database of exactly where their child's status is, what educational level could be collected from the schools. They may not have to create it themselves. It just, the school would say, oh yeah, you've passed second grade reading level, that it's in your file. When you walk into the OMSI museum, they may not know who you are at all. They could just give you their catalog of courses that are going on that day, and your AI could look through that list and go, yeah, that one's out because he's not at that reading level. This one, they don't need to know anything about you, but you put your child in exactly the right class and they get the best experience and they leave, and nobody has had to delve into the educational reading level of your child or their ethnic background. He just was in the right class. The parent chose the class with the aid of the AI engine on the edge, right? It does some wonderful things that you can't do in the large database world. And I think it opens up the opportunity for new services. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we do it wrong over here and we're going to do it right over here. This only covers a certain number of different services that you could offer. This one covers a whole bunch of other ones. And we need both. We got to get both going.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the other questions, just tagging on to that, slightly parallel to it, not directly attached, is folks are often like, oh, this sounds like a lot of effort on the citizens part. Actually, we'll ask that to you, because I think that's a good question for the development of the citizen app. So, how folks are unwilling to install yet another app on their phone as it is today. So like, how are we gonna, the citizen app, you can, let's say you've convinced me to download the citizen app, right? I get that it's gonna allow me to interact with city services on a secure, private and on-demand basis, fantastic. But things like updating your address, like I've got my own answers, because we answer this every day. Data Swift between, we slip in personal data accounts and user journeys all the time invisibly. So you're accruing money or data in this case without even realizing it, so you can pick up and use it anytime. But for you guys, like what is that looking like now, or if it's not currently live, like what's it going to look like in terms of minimum effort from
that's an incredibly good question. We if you go out on the street and you ask people, would you be willing to build your own digital data file and maintain it for all of your medical records and your bank records and the rest of it, you're going to pretty much get a no across the board, right? It's a lot of heavy lift. So we have to automate that, right? That has to be very straightforward. And when you think about the data that's in your data file, most of it is created and put there by other people, right? I have a certificate that says that I graduated from Glasgow University, Strathclyde University, and what I need in my digital wallet is something that Glasgow put there that's validatable against Glasgow. It's got their, you need their public key to validate that it was from them, right? And that's what I need too. I can make up something that says, hey, I graduated from Glasgow in 1978 and stick it in my, it's not useful to anybody, right? It has to be from them. Bank account information, same way. So it becomes a repository where all of these disparate people, the state, the city, and others, put data that you have access to. I don't have to create my driver's license and put it in my wallet. They send me one, I drop it in my wallet. We need to get to that level of simplicity. Let's go a step further. I've got a watch here. It's a nice Withings watch. It does all my sleep counting, counts my steps and these things. I have a weighing machine in my bathroom that puts data into an app on my phone. I go to the doctor and they have my whole data file of medical information. I don't want to have to pull all that together. It should just go into my data file all the time. Now, the reason I don't do that at the moment is the only place I could do that, because I can't get all my medical data, is if I put that in my medical insurance account. Well, I don't necessarily want them to know on a daily basis what my weight is. I don't want them to know that I had a party last night and I ate a lot of food and I'm a little overweight this morning. I want that to be in my file. So I don't put all my data there because it's not private. But if it was mine, I would collect that data. A lot of people don't use Google tracking services. They don't want Google knowing exactly where they are. You can turn it on and it will tell you, and sometimes it will pop up a little question that says, we think you went to Trader Joe's yesterday afternoon at 2. Was that correct? And you say yes, and it now knows exactly where you went, which is incredibly useful information. I just want me to know it, not everybody else to know it. I want to know that, hey, when was it that I was last, at the dentist? It would be nice if that was just in my data wallet, and it can be put there completely automatically. I don't have to do anything to put it there. The GPS on my phone, the Wi-Fi connections, the Bluetooth connections, they collect huge amounts of data. It's very invasive if someone else has it. It's very useful if I have it. So I think I think it's exactly the right question. Once that becomes truly private personal information, we can turn on all of the sensors and devices that we walk around with every day and have that data collected automatically. Now, it may be noisy data, but it's still data. And if I use that noisy data with my AI engines to figure out real knowledge, it can be incredibly useful to me. How many times did I go to the gym last month? Do I have to sit down and spend the next 10 minutes writing them out? Or can I just ask my phone? It would be really good to be able to ask I don't want my daughter checking that and saying, hey, Dad, you didn't go to the gym enough last week. I want me to be able to look at it and say, damn it, I didn't go to the gym enough last week. So that kind of thing shifts. I think it can become quite automated. Let me throw one other thing in here that becomes really interesting. We do a lot of this work anyhow. We do a lot of work to create and manage our own data one way or another. When I change address, I do have to call, the electric company. I do have to call the water company. I have to turn it off here. I have to turn it on there. So I'm doing that. So it's actually less work to update my address in my personal data file. So as when I have the next transaction, it's the right address. But also the opportunity to have that information collected for me in an automated way allows me then to filter that data. If anybody's a data scientist, they know that a large database is not a panacea. It has a lot of, like we just talked about, it has a lot of wrong addresses in it. Any large data set you collect, particularly if IoT devices are involved, is noisy. There's a lot of junk in it. When it comes down to actually making decisions about stuff, turning stuff on and off, controlling things, you have to do a lot of work, or you're going to get some very strange behavior because there are bad sensors and other things. Provenance becomes incredibly important. The data that I collect on my phone, before I would share it with somebody, I would know, oh, wait a minute. It says I went to the gym 42 times last month. That's more than once a day. That's not right. Oh, Trader Joe's is next door to the gym and it just got it wrong a little bit, right? So these trips to that location, that GPS location, are a blend of those two. And so when I tell people, I'm not going to tell them I went to the gym 42 times. I'm going to tell them, yeah, I probably went every day 30 times to Trader Joe's. So if these are blended, then 12 times I went to the gym. Yeah, that sounds right. That's about right. So there's huge, it's not just that you can automate the collection of the data, but by creating the provenance at the edge point, you can provide filtering to blatantly incorrect information because I'm the one who's doing it, right? You're not just sitting there going, well, I've been, the data says this guy went to the gym 42 times last month. That's really weird, but that's the data. No, I can correct that and I can explain why it's wrong. I can provide my input. And by the way, you don't have to change the root data. I just add some metadata that says, it looks like in my data file, 30 of these were Trader Joe's, just got it wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think you did go to the gym 42 times. Your shoulders are definitely looking bigger than last time we spoke. But no, I agree with you. Like in terms of automated data capture, like if you think about it, every time you download an app these days, what's the first thing you do? You tick the boxes that say, yeah, give access to live location, my contacts, my emails, whatever else. So, I mean, phones produce this. This is a years old stat now. I don't know what it is, but when I looked at it, it was 16 gig a day in terms of what you create online digitally. So just you moving around websites, WhatsApp, Instagram. So yeah, all of that being pulled in or at least filtered through a data account. And then, as you're saying, to the noise, I think there are quick wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if it's something as complex as Trader Joe's versus the gym, there are other quick wins that allow you to figure that out much faster. So in terms of your purchasing,
Yeah,
if you got your live bank
the
transaction
AI engine
records,
would go, oh yeah, you were at Trader
yeah,
Joe's, not at
yeah. So
right.
there's all this stuff that you can, and in terms of filtering, like the way I envision it, and I hope it's not too long. I really do hope that something like, you know, the full scale Citizens app within 12 months should be good. But we spend so much time doing this, right? We go through Instagram, I don't know how many hours a day. In fact, Instagram's got that beautiful thing now where it's like, you spent 7 hours and 15 minutes today on Instagram. But, you know, if you're spending an extra 5 minutes when the Citizen app's just pushing you saying, hey, were you here? Did you do that? Did you do that? You just click yes, no. Within 5 minutes, you've already corrected half of the information anyway. And it's fun because it's about you, for you. No one else can see it. And hey, you know what? Your life just became a lot more digital and liquid and you owned it, you know. So
yeah, actually,
anyway.
one more add to that. You know, how many times do you get really irritating ads, right? And let's take, for example, I'm shopping for a car. I want every car ad today, and then tomorrow I buy a car. For the next month, I'm getting damn car ads. I don't want them, right? It would be easy for me to put into my AI engine, hey, I bought a car, and all those ads would just stop, right? Yep. Who wants to spend money advertising to me cars when I just bought a car? They know I'm not going to buy, you know, another couple of cars, right? I'm done. But then I come to wanting to buy a car again 3 years later. I can go into my own app and say, hey, I'm looking for a car. And now those ads start coming in again. So instead of the, you know, Amazon making some assumption about, oh, yeah, he looked at cars, therefore I'm going to pump him with cars, they would know, oh, yeah, don't send him car ads. He just bought a car. And that ability for me to express my own desires as opposed to them being assumptions, right? I think in some of the Data Swift work you've done recently there's this opportunity to open up these marketplaces, which I think is brilliant, right? Open up a marketplace that says, you know, right now I'm concerned about my weight. I would like any kind of incentive to be sent to me about what I could do. So just reminding me, hey, you know, I'm within 20 feet of a gym, or you know, there's an opportunity to rent a bike here rather than get on the bus. I want those ads right now because it's on my mind. And those incentives can now be sent to me. If I wasn't looking to lose weight, those would be just a real irritation, right? So the ability to put yourself into a market for a period of time and take yourself out of a market, I think that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah, definitely preaching to the choir. That's Irene's origin story for what we're doing. We've got a lot more stuff, more advanced stuff in the flow regarding all of that that's going into deployment soon. So it's nice to hear someone else preaching it as much as us. So I'm going to quickly dive in. I'm really sorry, folks. We'll keep answers to these queues to 2 minutes because we've rambled quite a bit. So apologies for that for any of it that's been waxing lyrical, as we say in the UK. So let's start in order. So Stephanie's asked, in the US, inevitably, a lot of what we're talking about gets tangled up in politics. I mean, you're living in the US, Wilfred, so I'll let you talk about that. I think my one-line answer is when you, a bit like Wilfred said, when you start verifying things and it is done on a chosen basis, what we're calling agency for now, you actually begin to shift the paradigm to a more conversational society. But anyway, I'll let you
that's a really good question, Stephanie. I like it a lot. We got involved in a project here called Open and Accountable Elections. So, you know, get right to the core of it, what's going on politically here, because I think that's an important piece of this, because there's so much political noise here. I mean, it's hard to get through it. We created this approach, open and accountable elections. So the idea was that rather than accept large amounts of money for politicians, you can't stop it happening. But what you can do is you can create an environment in which a candidate can register themselves as fair, open and accountable elections, and in return for that, they get a matching from the city of, I think it's either 6 or 7x on any donation they get. But any citizen can only give up to $25, right? So you all the big money goes out, right? Because you've committed contractually that you're going to sign up for this program. So you're not going to take big donations. You're only going to take $25 donation, up to $25 from any citizen, and the city will match that 7x, right? So for every $25 you get, what is that? That's $175 matching. So you get $200. And in order to run that program, we need to know a few things about anybody who gives money, right? We need to know, first of all, are they somebody that's legitimately allowed to vote in that particular election? Are they old enough to vote in that election? And have they given $25 already to somebody else or to that candidate already? I need to know all those things. It works hugely. So let's say I create a database, which should be the traditional way. I create a database, I put all these people in it, and every time that they make a donation, I go and check the database and I say, okay, this person, yep, they live here, yep, they're 18 plus, yep, I do all of that stuff. That's a long process, right? That's a checking process that takes a week or two to run through. So 2 weeks before the election, money that's coming in is not going to the candidate because I haven't gone through that whole check. What if I was to do it the other way around? I was to put that information in the wallet. Right? I could start by saying, okay, that information's in the wallet. So when I actually have a contact with the candidate, that information is automatically checked by the candidate at that point. So the money won't transact. In fact, you can make that a code written contract that the code in my wallet and the code in his wallet interact, and they say, yes, we can do this transaction up to $25, and it's done. And my wallet now knows that I've given, however much I've given. So if I go to the next candidate, I can immediately do the next transaction and not exceed my $25, right? So all of that could be automated at the edge. You don't have to go back through the state databases and do all the checks. So now you've got this situation where right up to the last minute, I can walk in to a candidate and say, yes, I like what you're doing. I've got $10 I can still give you, and I'm going to give it you today, and the election's tomorrow, right? Now, what does that do? That means that all of that money that is going to, candidate Bob from the gun lobby that has nothing to do with the role that he's in, but puts him in a position to be able to influence gun lobby things in that state, when nobody in that particular municipality gives a damn about him being, supported by the gun lobby. It makes all of that go away, right? Because once he's in there, so now when I go to, yes, there are candidates that are taking money from dark money from a whole lot of places, but I would probably vote for the one that signed up for fair and accountable elections, because I know that his interests are the interests of the citizens who voted for him, and only the citizens who voted for him. You can do that with Data at the Edge. You cannot do that. So you could do that with the Citizen app. You can't really do it effectively with a huge database somewhere. Plus, all the privacy issues associated with creating that database that we've already talked about. So I think that it can be a very good way to start to deal with some of those problems. I will again point out, I'm sure you can find all sorts of ways around this, but these are tools. And as I'd said earlier on, they can be used well and they can be used badly, but having more tools in the wallet, so having the ability to create things that use large databases and having the ability to create services that use the edge gives you the best options for how to navigate some of these. I think particularly in that case where we're dealing with citizen information and doing what the citizens want and not what the big money lobbyists want, I think that Data at the Edge and services at the edge give you some very valuable tools that we could use to make things better, right? it's not a panacea, but I'll be very happy when that tool exists in the tool chest.
Yeah, and that's just one example. Just to, I guess, clarify what you're saying there, Wilfred, for Stephanie. I think Stephanie's question may have also been around just general uses in cities. And like I said, my big picture is we have a data liquid environment where every citizen's data is freely moving permissibly, because we know what's been doing with it. As I move around the city, it knows where I'm going, what I'm doing, helping optimize routes and services and stuff like that. But again, edge computing is the case where it's saying, look, actually every time that data gets transacted, you see it, you know what's going on with it. And so the room for misappropriation of information really drops. And it's drastic. I mean, it's a fraction of what it is today. Today, centralized systems, you're throwing data out there, it's getting stored in a big building. People are doing what they like in the building with it. You never see it. Whereas with this, you own the building, it's yours. And so the in and out process is a lot more like the real world. In fact, most people that ask questions to us on the Data Swift side, they're like, oh, but what about this? What about that? I'm like, well, yeah, but you're basically questioning the way the real world works, right?
Yeah.
Because if I've got that information, I'm handing it to you and it's my choice, right? That's an open market. You need that information to make the transaction. So if you don't like it, don't transact. It's that simple. So Joss, like I said, we'll try and keep these to 90 seconds. So Joss has asked, how are you defining socially advantageous acts? And on the flip side, how do you define what is negative? So I like that. I think this was with relation to when you were talking about incentives. So like go green. And yeah, I'll let you answer. If there's time afterwards, I'll throw mine in as well.
No, it's another great question, Josh. Thank you. We have tried, this may be a cop-out, and I apologize if it is. We have tried to stay away from defining policy too much, right? Because it's not a technically solvable problem. It's a socially solvable problem. You know, if you really have a democracy, democracies do things that you may not agree with, right? Quite often, half the country doesn't agree with things you do. You can't, if the population of the world doesn't want to fix climate change, they won't fix climate change. There's not a lot you can do about it. You can't create technology that fixes that problem for them. Now you can create a whole lot of incentives so as people who care about it can do it. But there's a policy issue here. We've got to convince people what the right thing is. I think what Data at the Edge allows us to do is to, as I say, become agents in our own decisions. So I think at the moment that the majority of citizens recognize the dangers of climate change, that hurdle has been passed. Yet policy is not keeping in line with that. Incentives and infrastructures and processes that we use are lagging quite well behind you know, the recognition of a large section of the world populace. If we could remove some of the clutter in the transactions that we do, in other words, if it wasn't, you know, that you know, that the way that money is invested is, you know, is through a set of processes that support old decisions and make new thinking about this harder, then we could move more quickly. We need to move more quickly. It's not that you know, most educated people in the world are oblivious to the problems that are being caused by climate change. It's that, you know, that there are huge capital investments in technologies that were developed in the last 100 years that keep us on fossil fuels, that keep it, and if we could apply a bias much more quickly, that we could change those things more quickly and be. So I don't think we can fix the problem that if people have the wrong idea about what a social good is, that we can stop them implementing that idea, because none of us know what the right thing to do is either. But I think it allows us to be agents, to be proactive in deciding where, you know, what services are and how they're deployed and where they're deployed, and that I believe in the wisdom of crowds, right? That if we're actually allowed to make those decisions ourselves, we will make better decisions. And to the extent that data and compute at the edge gives us agency to make those decisions, whereas data collected from us in the past and put into a large data store tends to be regressive, tends to pull us backwards. I think it helps. It helps a lot. But we'll still have to prove that. I don't know whether that answers the question quite, Joss, but I think it's a very complex and very important question.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of climate change because it's turning my home nation into a wine-growing country. So England is finally becoming capable of growing vineyards.
we have the same thing. We're in Oregon. Last weekend, which is the middle of February, was a beautiful, 70-degree sunny weekend, which just is weird. We live in a wine region that has been characterized by its Pinot Noirs, the lighter grapes that grow in less sunny districts. In a couple of years, we'll be growing, Cabernets and all sorts of, we'll be able to grow anything because, right? So there is upside. The downside, of course, is pretty obvious.
Well, I forget about that when I drink the wine, so it's no problem.
That's right. If you drink enough wine, there's no problem to the melting ice caps and the rising waters.
So to summarize what Wilfred said there, Josh, I think one thing that's interesting is, what data typically does is it shortens iteration cycles. So as we're trying to figure out decisions, you can do it more openly and you can figure out the response to the decisions you made a lot quicker when you have access to that data. And of course, when you've got centralized systems, you don't have access to any data. You've given the data away.
Things keep going a long way.
Whereas when you do it through something like a citizen app or whatever, I'm assuming, depends how the citizen app develops, the data is chosen to be given, but then you see the results, you see the transactions, you actually can see what's going on and folks can make informed decisions. So the final one, Stephanie's also asked a good one there, and I'll answer that one just succinctly because we've got a lot of use cases. I mean, it's where we come from essentially. So Ian had to dash off, but he's asked basically how folks can integrate with the citizen app. Great question. His use case is promoting and supporting city transit for visually impaired communities, particularly smart cities in the US. And I can connect you guys directly. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of services coming to the citizen app for integration, but as just a quick 30 seconds, how would you guys look to involve Ian and his corporation and what they're trying to do?
So please do connect us. So I work with a group out here. I have a position at Portland State University, and we have something called the Digital City Testbed Center, and they are specifically working at navigation apps for visually impaired in the city. And so I would love to talk to him and link him up with those researchers. There's some really good work going on there. Wow, it's a big question for 30 seconds. Let me just drop a few gems in there and see where it goes.
I suspect this is technically speaking. So like if you guys are gonna connect, I think it's useful for anyone watching, if they're looking to technically integrate with the citizen app. That's probably a conversation with you, let's be honest.
Well,
what does that look like?
Interestingly, a broader navigation question, right? And how we navigate through our urban environment. I can give you a very quick, easy example that's actually physically disabled rather than visually disabled, but I think it may illustrate the point. Some work was done recently by University of Washington in Seattle to try and add information to our normal sort of Google mapping tools that would help people with disabilities navigate the city. It interestingly enough, they found that they created pathways that went through buildings, and it had to have temporal things in it. So they needed to be able to crowdsource information about where curb cuts were, which buildings were open with elevators, because there's quite a lot of steep hills there. And so people in wheelchairs would be able, during the hours of that office was open, to come in to the building, go up in the elevator, come out at the back of the building, right? Those kinds of paths are not normally planned in Google Apps, but it requires a real collaboration between members of a community to create those data stores with particular ways. And once you start to realize that you're now crowdsourcing that data, that you're an agent in the collection of that data, what you find is that the data gets filled in because one poor guy who's trying to get around the city in his wheelchair finds that doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and finally he gets this one, he puts it in there, and the next guy who does it comes along. Now, there may be all sorts of ways in which they might create their own community of people creating that data, right? Blind people may choose to become members of a group that collects that kind of data and shares that kind of data at the edge, but they don't particularly want, their medical insurance folks delving into every detail of the complexity of how they navigate the city, right? So there's some really interesting models there. I would love to talk to him just from the smart city perspective, so please connect us up. I think the citizen app can play a role here, but in the spirit of what we've all been talking about, the people who should really answer that question are the people in that community, right? It should give them a set of tools that allows them to make sure that they get the services they need without the heavy hand of some corporate entity that's going to monetize that. That it allows them to create their own communities, get their own services, lobby for their own services to be paid for by government services. So I think there are doorways here, but it's a long conversation, and I'd love to do that with people in the community who tell us what's actually needed.
Yeah, I'll give you the short answer. And technically, yes, is the answer. We can do it, and I'm involved. Irene, myself, Tyler, our side of DataSwift, we're all involved in the citizens apps development. So if there's a technical question, the answer is yes, we can do that with you for sure. Wilfred's talking obviously about permission and folks ethically using it, but I'm sure you represent the community well by asking the question. I'll answer Stephanie's quick question. How about incentivizing large corporations? Great question, Stephanie. I think when it comes to something like the citizen app, the first question is, do you need them? So I'll let you figure that out as listeners, because you don't necessarily need corporations involved when you're moving around a city, because actually it's you interacting with the city services. And the second thing is, we at DataSwift specialize in basically correct alignment of incentives. So we talk about things like multiplier effects quite frequently. So for every $1 you spend on an app developed on DataSwift infrastructure, you see repercussions up the value chain being the business that's built on the infrastructure and the clients of that business, be it another business or a consumer, and then the knock-on effect of the consumer's world in terms of what they're purchasing or what they're doing. And so when you actually create alignment all the way up directly versus something that's more insular and feeds back to the business, what you end up with is growth. And that growth is constant. So it's a really basic example for advertising, for example. So you can use some of the businesses that build on our infrastructure will allow a double-sided market to form on their apps. So it could be a Costco app, and you see in the Costco app, oh, you've stored some of your data in the Costco app, and Costco's brought in some of its partners like Nike or whoever else, and you begin to see discounts for Nike because your data has matched within the app to the fact that you like Nike shoes. And so you go spend 80% of the full shoe cost at Nike. Nike gets a new customer, you save money because you got a discounted pair of shoes, and then you go running and you're better off for it, and the whole world around you is better off for it. So that's like a really basic example of what alignment would look like, sort of from the base to the top. And we aim to do that with everybody, citizen app inclusive. Although, yeah, it goes back to my first question. You arguably don't necessarily need big corporations, although we very much see them really backing this for many, many reasons, largely because they actually enjoy being involved in the physical environments that they're into. And I'm not misrepresenting anyone there. Those are legitimate conversations I've had in the last 5 years. So even from an ethical standpoint. Anyway, we're going to wrap up there because I'm being told off, and it has been a very long session. So maybe the video editing is going to cut a good few chunks of us waffling out. But thank you, Wilfred.
No, thank you, Ben. This was fun. I appreciate it. It was a nice chat. So
yeah,
I realize a lot will end up on the editing floor.
I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, I love chatting with you. So anyway, that's the end of the session. see you next time with Base Alpha. And thank you again, Wilfred. It was really good fun.
Thanks, man. Pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.